On Thursday, May 21st, 2026, NASCAR stopped, not slowed down, not paused for a moment, stopped, because the news that came out of Concord, North Carolina that afternoon was the kind of news that the sport was simply not ready for. Kyle Busch, two-time NASCAR Cup Series champion, winner of more races across NASCAR National Series than any driver in the history of the sport, the man they called Rowdy was gone. He was 41 years old. This is The Spotter. And today we are not here to talk about controversy. We are not here to debate or argue or analyze strategy. Today we are here to tell you the full story of one of the greatest racing drivers who ever lived, because Kyle Busch deserves that. His family deserves that, and the sport that he gave everything to for more than 2 decades deserves that. So let us start at the beginning, because the beginning is everything. Chapter 1, Las Vegas. Born to race. Kyle Thomas Busch was born on May 2nd, 1985 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Las Vegas in the 1980s was a city that never slept, never slowed down, and never apologized for how loud it was. And in many ways, Kyle Busch was that city in human form. His father, Tom Busch, was a racing fan who passed that love down to both of his sons. Kyle's older brother, Kurt, was already finding his way toward NASCAR when Kyle was still a child. And watching Kurt race, watching the speed and the competition and the raw intensity of it, Kyle Busch knew from a very young age exactly what he wanted to do with his life. He wanted to go faster than everyone else. He started karting as a young child, and he was immediately obviously different, not just fast, different, the way he read a racetrack, the way he felt the car underneath him, the way he was never satisfied with second place, never comfortable with anything less than absolute maximum effort. By his early teens, the racing world in the Western United States was already talking about this kid from Las Vegas. His father, Tom, put everything into Kyle's development. Hours at the racetrack, weekend after weekend of competition. A childhood that revolved around racing because that was what Kyle wanted and what Tom recognized his son needed. And then Hendrick Motorsports came calling. In 2004, at 18 years old, Kyle Busch made his NASCAR Cup Series debut at Hendrick Motorsports. 18. Let that age settle for a moment. Most 18-year-olds are starting their first job or heading to college. Kyle Busch was driving a Cup Series car for one of the most celebrated teams in NASCAR history. And from the very first race, he was fearless, not reckless, fearless. There is a difference. Reckless means you do not understand the risk. Fearless means you understand it completely and choose to push forward anyway. Kyle Busch chose forward every single time. In 2005, in just his first full season, he won his first Cup race at California Speedway. He was 19 years old. He celebrated with a bow, a showman's bow, right there in victory lane. That would become his signature for the next 2 decades. The bow said everything about who Kyle Busch was. It was theatrical. It was proud. It was a little bit arrogant to some people and a little bit magnificent to others. And it was absolutely, completely, uniquely him. The Hendrick years were where the world first saw what Kyle Busch was capable of. But they were also where the world first saw the personality that would make him the most polarizing driver in the sport. He was aggressive on the track in ways that other drivers found difficult to accept. He spoke his mind in ways that made public relations people uncomfortable. He was not interested in being liked by everyone. He was interested in winning. And those two things do not always coexist peacefully. But Jeff Gordon, his teammate at Hendrick, saw something different behind the bravado. He saw a young man who cared about the sport with a depth that went far beyond what he showed publicly. A young man who studied racing the way scholars study history, who thought about nothing else, who lived and breathed it every single moment of every day. In 2008, Kyle Busch moved to Joe Gibbs Racing, and that is where the legend truly began. The 15 seasons that Kyle Busch spent at Joe Gibbs Racing are unlike anything NASCAR has seen before or is likely to see again. From 2008 through 2022, he was the most complete racing talent in the sport, not just in the Cup Series. Across all 3 of NASCAR National Series simultaneously, he won races in the Cup Series, the Xfinity Series, and the Truck Series in the same weekend multiple times. It had never been done before. He called it the triple threat. He did it twice. His Xfinity Series record stands at 102 wins, the most in the history of that series, by a margin that is almost impossible to comprehend. The closest active driver is not within 50 wins of that record. His Truck Series record stands at 69 wins, also the most in the history of that series. And in the Cup Series, he won 63 races in a single career, 9th on the all-time list. And considering the competitiveness of the modern era and the parity that NASCAR has worked to build into the sport, that number may never be surpassed by a driver of his generation. In 2015, he won his first NASCAR Cup Series championship. That championship story alone could fill an entire video. He started the Daytona 500 with a broken leg sustained in a crash at Daytona the year before. He missed the first 11 races of the season. He had to petition NASCAR for a waiver just to be eligible for the playoffs. He came back, won races in the back half of the season, and closed out the championship at Homestead, Miami in November, winning a championship on a broken leg after missing 11 races. That is not just a sports story. That is something else entirely. He celebrated that championship win with Samantha, his wife, and the image of the two of them together in victory lane at Homestead, arms raised, eyes filled with everything that season had cost them. That image became one of the defining photographs of NASCAR in the 2010s. In 2019, he did it again, a second championship, this time fully healthy, dominant through the second half of the season, closing it out with the same fire and competitive intensity that had defined him since that first win in California in 2005. 2 championships, 63 Cup wins. The all-time wins leader across NASCAR 3 National Series with 234 victories. Those are the numbers, but the numbers are not the full story. Behind every remarkable racing career is a life that the cameras do not always see. And for Kyle Busch, that life was everything. He met Samantha at a NASCAR event. She was working in the industry and they connected. They got engaged in February 2010 and married on New Year's Eve of that same year at Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago. And in the years that followed, Kyle and Samantha Busch did something that very few athletes have done before. They talked openly about the struggles they were facing to have children, infertility, the IVF process, the heartbreak of it, the hope, the uncertainty, the way it tests a relationship and a person's fundamental sense of who they are. They did not hide it. They spoke about it publicly with honesty and with vulnerability that the tough exterior of the racing world does not often allow. And in doing so, they helped thousands of other couples who were going through the same thing feel less alone. They created the Bundle of Joy Fund, a foundation dedicated to helping other families access infertility treatment. Because Kyle Busch, the most aggressively competitive man on a NASCAR racetrack, looked at the pain he and his wife were experiencing and decided that the right response was not to keep it private. The right response was to use their platform to help others. In 2015, Brexton Locke Busch was born. Kyle Busch cried at Homestead that championship year. He was asked about it in the post-race interview, and he talked about the journey he and Samantha had been on to become parents. And for a brief moment, the armor came completely off, and Brexton grew up trackside. He was at every race. He was in the garage. He was learning the sport from the man who understood it better than almost anyone alive. By the time Brexton was 9 years old, he was already racing competitively himself, winning the Tulsa Shootout, competing at Millbridge Speedway, racing on dirt, just the way his father had always believed drivers should be developed. Kyle Busch was not just teaching his son to race, he was teaching his son everything. In 2022, Lennix Busch was born, Kyle and Samantha's daughter. The family was complete. And Kyle Busch, in the final years of his racing career, said more than once that his children had given him a different perspective on everything. That becoming a father had made him see the sport differently, made him understand what really mattered. Brexton turned 11 years old on Monday, May 19, 2026. 2 days later, his father was gone. When Kyle Busch left Joe Gibbs Racing after 2022, the NASCAR world was stunned. 15 seasons at JGR, 2 championships, 63 wins. the most successful driver-team partnership in the modern era of the sport. And it ended because of money, because of sponsorship, because of the business reality of NASCAR that no amount of talent can override. Kyle Busch went to Richard Childress Racing, and despite the wins he got in 2023 in the first half of the season, including what turned out to be the 63rd and final Cup win of his career at Gateway in June, the move to RCR was never quite right. The equipment was not what he had been used to at JGR. The resources were not the same. And across 2024 and 2025, for the first time since 2005, Kyle Busch went through entire seasons without winning a Cup race. The winless streak, the crew chief changes, the radio frustrations that became public. All of it was painful to watch for anyone who had seen what Kyle Busch was capable of at his best. But even in those difficult final seasons, the fire never left. He was still going to the racetrack every weekend believing he could win. Still pushing, still refusing to accept that the chapter was closing. 2 weeks before the Coca-Cola 600, he ran the Truck Series race at Watkins Glen. He was heard on the radio telling his crew to have a doctor waiting for him at the end of the race. He was not feeling well, but he raced anyway, because that is who Kyle Busch was. He did not want to miss a race. He did not want to be replaced. He pushed through it the best he could, the way every competitor pushes through, because the seat was his and he was not ready to give it up. On Wednesday, May 20th, 2026, he collapsed while using a simulator at a General Motors facility in Concord, North Carolina. The 911 call recorded a caller describing a man who was coughing up blood, feeling hot and afraid he was going to pass out. He was awake when emergency responders arrived. He was not awake for long. On Thursday, May 21st, 2026, Kyle Busch died. The cause, confirmed by his family in a statement released on Saturday, was severe pneumonia that had progressed into sepsis. Rapid, overwhelming, complications that the medical team could not stop. He was 41 years old. He left behind Samantha, Brexton, Lennix, his parents, his brother Kurt, and a sport that has no idea what to do with the silence he left behind. The reaction from the NASCAR community when the news broke on Thursday afternoon was unlike anything the sport had seen in a generation. Drivers who had feuded with Kyle Busch on the track, who had come to blows with him in pit road confrontations, who had argued with him in press conferences, they all said the same thing. This sport is not the same without him. NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell said that Kyle Busch defines what it means to be a racer in NASCAR. He said the family reunions week to week, what every NASCAR weekend becomes for the people who work in the sport, are not going to be the same without him. But he promised they would do everything possible to continue his legacy and support his family. Austin Dillon, his teammate at RCR, wrote that Kyle Busch was the ultimate racer and his favorite teammate and driver of all time. He said he always felt like he had Kyle's back and Kyle had his. He said he loves him. The candy brand that sponsored Kyle Busch for 15 years at Joe Gibbs Racing released a statement saying he represented their brand with great passion, elite skill, and deep loyalty, that he never ran a race he did not think he could win, and that through it all, his focus was always his beautiful family. Daytona International Speedway released a statement calling his accomplishments at their track legendary. From winning in his very first ARCA start there at 18 years old, to his Cup win in the summer of 2008, to the poles and the near misses and the moments that made Daytona what it is. NASCAR called him a future Hall of Famer, a rare talent, one who comes along once in a generation. Fierce, passionate, immensely skilled. The entire Rowdy Nation, the community of fans that Kyle Busch had built over 2 decades through his personality and his performance and his willingness to be exactly who he was, erupted with grief. Richard Childress Racing announced that the number 8 Chevrolet will be retired for the rest of the 2026 season. The number that Kyle Busch drove in his final seasons will not turn another lap in 2026. And at Charlotte Motor Speedway, before the Coca-Cola 600 this weekend, the race that Kyle Busch was preparing for when he collapsed LED screens around the track showed his image in tribute, the garage, the grandstands. The entire Charlotte Motor Speedway complex stopped and looked up at those screens and said goodbye. There will be a time for full retrospectives. There will be a time for Hall of Fame discussions and championship analysis and debates about where Kyle Busch ranks among the greatest to ever do it. But today is not that time. Today is for Samantha and for Brexton, who turned 11 years old just 2 days before his father left, and for 4-year-old Lennix, who is too young to understand what has happened but who will grow up knowing who her father was through the stories that people like us will keep telling. Kyle Busch was not easy to love for everyone. He was loud. He was competitive to a degree that made other people uncomfortable. He said what he thought and did not apologize for it. He raced with an aggression that made him enemies. And he wore all of it openly, without embarrassment, without apology. But beneath all of it was a man who loved racing with every single thing he had. A man who drove to every racetrack believing today was the day. A man who looked at his struggling years at RCR and never stopped pushing, never stopped believing, never accepted that his best was behind him. A man who built a foundation to help couples struggling with infertility because his own pain gave him empathy for theirs. A man who watched his son Brexton learn to race and felt in that a kind of completeness that no championship trophy could ever fully provide. 234 wins across NASCAR 3 National Series, 2 Cup championships, 19 consecutive winning seasons in the Cup Series, a record that will stand for a very long time. And now at Charlotte Motor Speedway on Memorial Day weekend 2026, the race that was supposed to be just another stop on his season has become something else entirely. The Coca-Cola 600 this year will be run without Kyle Busch in the field for the first time in over 2 decades. But every driver who takes the green flag on Sunday will carry him with them, because that is what legends do. They never really leave. Rest easy, Rowdy. You gave this sport everything you had, and this sport will never forget you. If this tribute meant something to you, please like this video and subscribe to The Spotter. Leave a comment below with your favorite Kyle Busch memory. Share this video with someone who loves NASCAR, because the best thing we can do right now is keep talking about him. Keep his name alive. The Spotter. See you next time.